here. He was standing beside you. You were talking to Bobby, but he wanted to talk to you. This is him over here if you want to come over and meet him real quick. We got a couple of minutes. Okay. Where's your boyfriend? Okay. I want to welcome everybody to the March edition of the Salt Luncheon. I also want to welcome our live streamers. We're live streaming this program, probably to a much larger audience than this, but we're glad you're all here. Just very quickly, let me introduce a couple of folks to you. Over in the corner, we have Paul Lawler, our senior minister, and Ken Stewart, one of our care ministers. We have, standing up in the back, wandering around, Paul Dorman, who is the senior adult chair this year. Up at this table, I have my wife, Ellen, who is my assistant in this process, and, of course, some of our past members, Barbara Prescott, Elizabeth Duncan, and Joe Thweet. And also I want to thank the folks, Mary Elizabeth and Leanne Murray, who are doing your name tags today. And so when our speaker finishes, we'll serve lunch. Got a very good lunch for us today, and we have an $8 pass-through that strictly covers the cost of the lunch. It's not we're not making money on it. But just very quickly, heads up, our April 25th speaker is going to be Jack Sammons. And I call Jack a jack of all trades because he's had his hand in everything. But I'm really excited today to have Doug Weatherford. You're in for a real treat. I've known Doug for a long time. When I was growing up, there were two jobs that I wanted, one of two. One was either the elevator operator at the Sears distribution center, or a Duckmaster, one or the other. So I'm glad to be able to live through you today. But just to talk about Doug, Doug's here with his wife Tricia. We're glad to have her. So Doug is a 1965 graduate of Overton High School. He did tell me, even though I graduated in '65 from White Station, that we're not the same age. He's much, much younger than I am by about 10 months. Went to Overton, then went on to Memphis State University, where he got his degree in business administration and a minor in history. A good thing for a Duckmaster. So he's been the GM for hotels from Washington, D.C. to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And he worked for Holiday Inn and was a territory manager in their hotel sales division. And while there, he won an Executive Development Award. He's been on the board of directors for the Memphis Hotel and Motel Association and the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Here's where it gets fun. He's been a Duckmaster for over 1 million visitors to the Peabody on the twice daily, 365 days a year, twice daily Duck March. And he also has had personal guide tours for over 20,000 people. And he's been on multiple TV shows like Hallmark. Ellen, you probably have seen him at some point. Netflix and ESPN and the Housewives of Dallas. I'm wondering about that with Doug. And he's been in countless weddings. Graceland has been on television in Australia, Sweden, the UK, and Bolivia. So please join me in a warm salt luncheon for semi-retired Duckmaster Doug Weatherford.
Well, thank you, Dick. That sounds like a lot of stuff, but it really isn't all that impressive. But I'm glad to be here. This is a nice break because I've been very frustrated for the last month or so, and it's about to get me down. I've got a duck in the fountain that keeps getting out. And I catch her and put her in almost every day back in the fountain. And about 4 weeks ago, someone held the door open too long to the street, to Union Avenue, and she got out. I had to chase her down the street, and she went into a drugstore. I went in, she was talking to the pharmacist. She said, "Give me some corn." He said, "This is a drugstore, I don't have any corn." So of course she ran away, kept getting out and going back, and about the 4th time, he was sick of it. She said, "Give me some corn." He said, "If you say that again, I'm going to nail your bill to the counter." And of course she was horrified. She came back the next morning, she said, "You got any nails?" He said, "No." She said, "Give me some corn." So you can see the stress that I'm under here in dealing with all this. Now, how did I get started in this stuff? Dick mentioned that I'm a general manager of a bunch of hotels. I've been in the corporate hotel areas and hospitality sales and so forth, but I had decided that I had enough. My old ticker was telling me I had enough of all the P&Ls and all the stress that you have to go through, and so I retired from the hotel business. And my good friend Jimmy Ogle, I bet a lot of you people know Jimmy, he wanted my resume. And one day I saw him on the street. He said, "Oh, I sent your resume to the Peabody." I said, "Jimmy, I told you I didn't want to be in hotel management anymore." He said, "Oh, it's not management." I should have known. But as it turns out, Jimmy wanted that job. He had interviewed already as a Duckmaster. He wanted to cap his career as the Duckmaster after all the history and stuff that he'd mastered. But at the same time, the job managing Beale Street Landing came open, and they wanted him to do that. So he flipped my resume over to the management at the Peabody Hotel. Well, they called me, and I didn't take it seriously. I called my wife, and I said, "Hey, how would you like for me to be a Duckmaster?" And by the time she got through laughing and caught her breath, she said, "Are you serious?" So I went ahead and I interviewed, and as it turns out, they took it more seriously than I did. I've had executive committee interviews, 20 people for a Duckmaster. Then I had to go up and audition in the Skyway Ballroom up on the rooftop, and they stood around that circular dance floor there and listened to see if my voice delivery was okay and all that stuff. And before I knew it, I had the job, and I'm thinking, now wait a minute, this must pay a lot more than what I'm thinking, you know. But I believe that doors open, and I think that you can't control your life many times, and sometimes the craziest thing in the world might happen. The door opens, and it's best to walk through it, you know, if that's going to happen. So, I try every day when I'm going into work to talk to God and say, my meager talents are not worth a whole lot, but whatever it is you wanted me to do here, I'm open today. Please use me as your vessel for anything you want. And I believe he's done it a few times. I couldn't tell you, there's probably more times than I realized, because I didn't say I wanted to be in control of anything. I just said, I'm available, that's all. And I think I'm happier in that condition. I'm just available, and I think that's what he wants. He wants us to pay homage and love him and be available for whatever purposes he has for you. And that's what I think I've done. I don't even know how it's turned out in many cases, because it's not up to me to know how it turned out. But anyway, that's kind of how I started. And that's one of the reasons I continue on in this business. Another is, I don't believe the city of Memphis is represented very well in people that present a positive image. And there's some people that try, like Dick. Some people who try to present that positive side, but there's not enough, to counteract all the negativity that we hear every day. And so I like to do my part too. I like to meet with people in the hotel. We still have hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world that come to Memphis. Dick can attest to that. Riverboats and people from the UK. I must have at least 24 people from the UK every single day that I meet in the hotel. They love Memphis. They want to hear about the history of rock and roll and all that kind of stuff. And the last thing we want to do is present a negative image back to them after they've spent all that money and come all this way. So anyway, I enjoy doing that. So most of the time when I got this job, for the last 15 years or so, I have been head Duckmaster, but it's off and on. I attempted to retire about 3 years ago, and it didn't work. They kept calling me up, and they kept telling me that we need you to come back. This new guy needs more training. The ducks, we got new ducks. You got to come in and help and all that. I finally said, leave me alone. I'll go ahead and I'll take those 2 days. So I'm back 2 to 3 days a week now. So when I'm there, I'm the hotel historian. I do my history tours and all that sort of thing. And as it turns out, they're pretty good. So I'm enjoying what I'm doing now. It's the hospitality industry without the P&Ls every month, and that tends to lower the blood pressure a little bit. So my duties are performing those duck marches, and I do welcome speeches to conventions and things when they come in, and my history tours. In just a minute, before we do that, I'm going to take you on one of my days at the hotel, and I'll do the Duck March speech for you that everybody hears every day, and then I'll take you along with me on a history tour of that hotel in our mind here. But before we do that, Dick had thought that maybe you would like to see some of the people that I've met in the hotel. So I've tried to pull a few pictures out and talk about some of the people that I've run into in the lobby. And I've met them either because they want the PR, they're there because of the PR department put them in as my honorary Duckmaster or something like that, or I just see them in the lobby. If you come to Memphis, especially for the first time, you go to the Peabody lobby to kind of check out the culture and all that sort of thing. So we'll look at a few people. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, there I am, and I'm sorry, I'm low tech. I did a screenshot there, and I didn't trim it off, but that's me marching the ducks. Now, that's my wife, Tricia, and I wanted to introduce you to her. She's right here. And, my friends tell me, and Dick, you can relate to the terminology, that I've outkicked my coverage. And I don't doubt it, but she's the biggest blessing in my life. So there's my kids, Tricia and my 3 kids. Of course, they're all grown, and we've got grandkids and so on. I'm not going to give you numbers and things like that because I'm like Pavlov and his salivating dogs, Sometimes I go to say something and I'm going, oh, and I wait for that kick in the shin. Like, don't you mention ages, or how many grandkids we have or something like that. So I'm sort of doing this. Now, this is Mr. Bells, Jack Bells, and I think most of you know that he's the patriarch of the family that owns the hotel. And what a wonderful man. If it weren't for him, Memphis would be in trouble, I think. He and a couple of other people. But since his wife passed away about 3 years ago, I guess, Marilyn, he hasn't been out much. And that's the first time I've seen him personally since that happened. He used to come into the hotel on a regular basis and wear his three-piece suit. He's about 90, 94 at that time. And he would wear his three-piece suit, and he would come in with his physical therapist, and they'd go down to the gym and work out in his three-piece suit. And I would talk to him. Down there. But this was a real thrill for me. He came to listen to my speech again, and of course, there's another guy there now that does 5 days a week, up to 5 days a week. And so he came out there, and he had his great-grandchildren, and he wanted them to be honorary Duckmasters. And so I did that for him, and he said, "Doug, I get to hear you one more time." And I could have melted. What a nice guy. So these are just an example of people that I meet in the hotel, tourists and so forth. These two I've kept up with online. Al Caston and his wife. Now, they're from Cleveland, and when I'm doing my history tour, I pretty much let people know what I think about Cleveland's claim to being the preeminent rock and roll city. And so I let him know that. Turns out he was from Cleveland, and he was the president of a fan club up there. So we got to be friends, and he still we communicate online. All right, some of you sports enthusiasts might recognize Jim Nantz there. He's was just retired sportscaster for CBS. I'm going to do just a little three people here that let's see how many you know. Malcolm Dandridge, he's a big guy. And the team comes in and stays in the hotel before home games frequently. And so I talked to him there. I guess I'm still almost 6'3". Look at him. He's a big guy. Who knows who this is? Other than Dick. Larry Keenan, hero of the 1972 Memphis basketball team. And he's also a good guy. These folks are all nice people, very nice. And it was a pleasure to meet him. Jimmy Carter, he came in one day. And I usually tell people on my tour before I show this picture, I'll say, there was a fellow who came in one day and he was kind of pitiful. I felt bad for him. He said, I've been around the world many times. I've won a lot of accolades, but I've never marched the Peabody Ducks. If you'd please lend me a cane and let me have a photo op, I'd really appreciate it. And I said, I don't know, sir, it's highly irregular. He said, I'll do it for peanuts. Now, he didn't really say that, but I like to say it. But he was a nice guy. He came in just as I was starting my speech, and talk about wanting to fumble over your lines. You got the former president of the United States and his entourage there, and they're listening to your duck speech right in the middle. It was a pleasure to meet him. He's still hanging on. He's still alive. Sybil Shepherd, we put her duck print in the sidewalk outside. She came to me the first time I met her there in the hotel, and she said, I want somebody to tell the Bellses that I want my name out there on the sidewalk like everybody else has, because I did a lot to help the city and a lot to help this hotel getting reopened. I said, okay, I'll pass that along. And as it turns out, they had a ceremony, and they put the duck print with her name out on the sidewalk there. Andie MacDowell, the actress, she was in town to do a fundraiser or something like that. Nice lady. You'd be shocked if she wasn't a nice lady. Melissa Etheridge, the singer, she was doing an album here in Memphis, and so she wanted to be honorary Duckmaster. Now, many local people know David Porter, but most of my people on my tours and people I meet in the lobby don't know him. That name isn't as well known. They don't recognize him, but I usually tell them, his music. He wrote, "Soul Man, hold on, I'm coming. When something's wrong with my baby, something's wrong with me. I'm your puppet," and on and on, and all the Blues Brothers stuff. We'll talk about him a little more in just a minute. Eddie Floyd. Eddie had a song in the 60s called "Knock on Wood." I saw him down there looking in Lansky's window in the lobby one day, and I went over to him and I said, I talk about you almost every day on my tours. He said, "What do you say?" So I told him the story, which I'm going to tell you in just a little bit, and he said, "That's exactly the way it happened." So when I tell my stories about music born within sight of that building, then I've researched them, or I have good reason to know it's all true, or I know the people that were involved in it. Now, this is Bruce Johnston. He's one of the original Beach Boys. He came over and he started to film or take a picture while I was speaking just before I started. And I saw him and I didn't recognize him, and I started to say, "Sir, you can't stand there. You're blocking people's view." And I saw who he was. I took his picture. And he said, "I understand you do a good music history tour after this is over." And I said, "Well, that's what they say." He said, "Can I go?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So if you were on that tour, every time I talked about music born within sight of that building or in this area, he'd raise his hand and he'd say, "Can I tell a story about that too?" So you got commentary from the Beach Boys, which is pretty neat. Now this is Chris Rock, the comedian. He was out there and he was going to listen to my speech. And I saw him just before I started, and I went over to him and I said, introduced myself, and I said, "Do you want me to get security to come over and kind of move you out of the way so people won't bother you?" And he said, "They won't bother me." And he pulls out a pair of really thick framed black glasses and puts them on. Sure enough, you couldn't tell who he was. Who knows who that is? From the Love Boat. From the Love Boat, Isaac the bartender. He was my honorary Duckmaster, and very nice fellow. This guy came in and tried to sell me something. I never could figure out what it was. It has a Central Barbecue T-shirt on. I thought maybe it's barbecue. Cheech Marin, Cheech and Chong, and of course he's been known for a lot of other things since then. He's an accomplished actor. I guess that's it. Okay. So, don't want to leave it on Cheech when I look at him. Okay. Can I take you on my daily routine there at the hotel? Of course, I march those ducks. I get new ducks every 90 days. And the way we do that is because ducks only live about 5 years on the average in their habitat. Now, in the Guinness Book of World Records, you've got a duck that's 27 years old, and that's the difference between a duck that's being cared for or ducks that are being blown out of the air by hunters, So anyway, I start that duck march in the morning. We get new ducks. When I get new ducks, I roll the red carpet, and I ask people to form a human tunnel. And people sit alongside the red carpet so that the ducks don't see any options along the way, and I march them down to after about a week to 2 weeks of that, they get it, and that's where they want to be anyway, and I don't have any more trouble. But we train, I say we, because it's whoever there that helps to train. We get new ducks every 90 days, and so we have to train every 4 times a year. So when I get up there, I talk to the crowd, tell them about what they're getting ready to see. And ladies and gentlemen, live from the historic Peabody Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, the Duck March. And we're going to march these ducks down from the rooftop down to the lobby. My name is Doug. I'm the Duckmaster, and I'm going to march them for you. But first, let me take you on a journey. It is said that the Delta begins right here in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, and it ends on Catfish Row in Vicksburg, Mississippi. They also say that this Peabody Hotel has 13 stories, and that's not true. It has thousands of stories. Stories of visiting presidents consecutively from Harry S. Truman to George W. Bush, of diplomats and dignitaries and monarchs. Stories of the big bands of the 30s and 40s broadcasting live from the historic Skyway Ballroom up on the rooftop. And stories of the king of rock and roll, but also of anniversaries celebrated and reunions visited. And through it all, the Peabody Ducks have marched from the rooftop down to the lobby, and in so doing, they've woven the fabric which contains the names and the faces and the events that are the history of this hotel. It all started back in 1869 when Colonel Robert Brinkley realized his dream by opening a state-of-the-art hotel just 2 blocks from here at Monroe in Maine, called the Brinkley House. It was to set the tone for cuisine and luxury in the South. Unfortunately, the Colonel's good friend and investor, Mr. George Peabody, passed away over in London about the the time that hotel opened, and they changed the name to the Peabody in his honor at that time. It went along there some 55 years at that location, hosting such luminaries as Teddy Roosevelt and President McKinley. Then on September the 1st, 1925, the doors opened to this beautiful expanded facility we stand in today at the cost of some $5 million in a couple of years of construction. That's not the whole history of this hotel, folks, not by a long shot. So if you get an opportunity, go up to the mezzanine level and check out our memorabilia room. If you go in there, you'll see a collection of names and faces, souvenirs of decades past. My favorite is a framed memo from Mr. Gary Bells, managing partner of the hotel, to the food and beverage director who was trying to change the menu over in Chez Philippe. He told him, when you change that menu, there'd better not be any duck on any menu of the Peabody Hotel. We cannot be seen as having slaughtered our mascot, he said. The guy figured out, well, I better get this right away. So anyway, the speech goes on from there. We talk about Edward Pembroke. In 1940, Edward Pembroke was hired by the hotel as a bellman, but he was a multi-talented individual. In another life, he'd been an animal trainer with Barnum and Bailey Circus. He told management upon his employment, if you'll let me, I'll take 5 North American mallard ducks, 1 male and 4 females, instead of these 3 English call ducks you have here, and I'll train them to march from the rooftop palace across to the elevator, down to the lobby level, across the red carpet and into the fountain every day at 11 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, I'll march them back and put them to bed. Management didn't know what to think about that. They rolled their eyes. They looked at each other. They said, all right, Edward, give that a shot. See what you can do. And for 50 years, Mr. Pembroke guided those ducks from the rooftop down to the lobby. And in so doing, he became an ambassador of goodwill for the Peabody Hotel and for the city of Memphis. And he appeared in such venues as The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, the Sesame Street program, where he and his ducks helped to celebrate National Rubber Ducky Day. They also did photo shoots in People and other magazines, such as Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Edition, where the ducks discreetly showed very little leg. If I was a person like Mr. Pembroke, I would say that I've mastered what I've done, wouldn't you? Management thought so, and so they bestowed upon Edward Pembroke the title Duckmaster, the world's first Duckmaster here at the Peabody Hotel. Well, he's no longer with us today, folks, but Mr. Pembroke's spirit remains here in this lobby, and if you'll check out the southwest entrance when you leave, there's a framed picture of he and his beloved ducks looking down on our ceremony today. That's a little history of the hotel, a little tradition of the ducks. That would just about wrap it up, except for a duty and a privilege that I have to perform. From time to time, we encounter someone with such integrity and such personality and such people's skills that we have to offer them an opportunity to come and help us with our duties at the fountain. And today we have such a person. I want you to greet Mr. Paul Lawler. Come on up. I'm sure it's Dr. Lawler, but okay. So, okay. Paul is going to help me with my responsibilities here, theoretically, at the fountain. But before anything can be official, we must have a proclamation. Everybody knows that. So here we go. Whereas the daily march of the world-famous Peabody Ducks is a time-honored tradition, begun in 1933 and attended by countless visitors, and whereas the care and the protection of the Peabody Ducks must be attended to on a daily basis and can only fall to persons of high standards and great distinction, and whereas you are such a person, be it resolved that on March the 21st, 2024, Paul Lawler has been chosen honorary Duckmaster. Congratulations. Now, in order for Paul to help me with my duties properly, we have an official Peabody Duckmaster's cane for you. Okay, all right. Well, we've talked about the history of the hotel, the tradition of the ducks, and I've introduced you my fine honorary Duckmaster. All that remains is to play that John Philip Sousa King Cotton March and march our 5 feathered friends single file up the red carpet into the elevator en route to their palace on the rooftop. When the elevator door closes again in just a few moments, you too will have been eyewitness to the world-famous march of the Peabody Ducks. That's it. Thank you, sir. You'll have to come and fulfill the rest of your obligation down at the hotel.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So then, I have to square away all the carpeting and all that stuff. And I do a history tour of the hotel. And actually, I've become pretty good at that. I'm the hotel historian as well. I'm designated Duckmaster and hotel historian. In fact, I was very pleased that I was nominated for Historian of the Year for Historic Hotels of America, the affiliation that we have. So I was very pleased with that. Never did get it because I attempted to retire before the next year when I think I was due to get that. But my tours are pretty popular there in the hotel. But it's not me, it's what I have to work with. That hotel is within sight, in my opinion, of 60% or so of all American pop, the formation of all American pop music, 60% of it anyway, the genres of that music. Up on the mezzanine level above the front desk, Elvis had his high school prom. In the table next to the fountain in the lobby, he signed his first contract with RCA. The people that taught him how to dress and dressed him for 30 years own Lansky store right there off the lobby, still have his clothes on the rack. Jerry Lee Lewis misbehaved in the bar down the hall multiple times. Neil Diamond wrote his most significant song right there in that hotel and changed his image. On my tour, it's an hour and a half, I will show you exactly where rock and roll began, exactly where the first published blues music was written, and we won't leave the building. So it's a good tour. Let me take you on it. I'll leave a few things out. I'll try to hit the high points. We'll start, I actually show you the picture of the original Duckmaster, and we talk about a few things about him. He resembles actually George Burns in the picture that's out there. He's got the big glasses and all that. So I'll tell people that he resembles George Burns, and the last time I remember seeing Mr. Burns, it was on TV in his dressing room in Las Vegas, and the interviewer said, he was about 98. The interviewer said, "Now, Mr. Burns, is it true that there's a peephole developing in the wall between your dressing room and the chorus girls next door?" And he hung his head and he said, "Well, I wish you hadn't asked me about that, but if they want to look, let them look." So then we go down toward the bar, down the corner bar at the end of the room, which used to be called Mallard's Lounge. And I talk about a fellow that used to play down there, and many of you have probably seen him, called Jason D. Williams. And he was reputed to be the unacknowledged son of Jerry Lee Lewis. That's not true, I don't think. But anyway, that was the scuttlebutt at the time. He looked a lot like him, and that sort of thing. Well, on the first trip to Memphis, I brought my wife up, and we were standing there in the doorway listening to this guy, Jason D. Williams, and I was telling her, that they say that he's supposed to be Jerry Lee Lewis's son. And she listened to him. She said, "Well, he's very talented, but I don't believe the stuff about Jerry Lee Lewis. That's just a publicity ploy." And I said, "All I can tell you is that they say he comes in here all the time, and he's obsessed with this guy, and he doesn't deny the stories." And I looked around, and there he was, 2 tables over. I said, "There he is." Excuse me. She said, "That's not Jerry Lee Lewis." And I said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Here, hold this." And I said, "What are you doing?" And off she goes. And she goes over to him. She said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm really sorry to bother you, but you're not Jerry Lee Lewis, are you?" He takes a look at her and he says, "I sure am, darling." And so then he looked up and he said, "Now, is that big fellow standing over there your husband?" She said, "Yeah." He goes. So that was my first encounter with early rock and roll. Speaking of early rock and roll, the name Lansky is synonymous with early rock and roll in Memphis. The Lansky family operates all of the shops on the side of the hotel today. But back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they owned a men and boys clothing store a couple of blocks down the street at 2nd and Beale. And young Elvis would walk past that store. He was a senior in high school, and he had a part-time job as an usher in a movie theater on Main Street. He'd walk past the door of Lansky's, and he'd look in the window on the way back. And one day, Bernard Lansky, Mr. B, he came outside. He said, "Son, I see you standing here all the time. You never come in. Is there something I can do for you?" He said, "Well, I'm a local entertainer." He said, "Yeah, you're also the usher in the movie theater. I've seen you down there." He said, "Yes, but I'm doing bigger gigs all the time. I think I'm going to be on local TV, and I don't have the wardrobe for things like that. And your clothes look like what I should be looking at, but it's too expensive. I can't afford it." He said, all right, kid, you're breaking my heart. Come on inside. I like you. I'm going to help you out, but you're going to have to listen to me because you're too shy. You're never going to make it. He said, is that right? He said, yeah, what I'm going to do is dress you in pinks and blacks and colors like that to get the attention your personality is never going to get. Now, Elvis has heard enough about his personality, so he said, I don't think so. Men don't wear pink. I'm not going to do that. He said, all right, forget it. And he started to walk away. And Elvis thought, man, I better not look a gift horse in the mouth. He dropped his guard against the color of pink. He called him back. He became obsessed with it. That's why the pink Cadillacs and all that. And then I'll usually take my tour group down to Lansky's store. And we'll talk about, how Lansky's have had a number of men's stores since the days of Elvis. But their main store, of course, today is in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel. They opened there as a favor to the Bells family, who they knew. They went to synagogue with them, I think. And so they asked them to open up their store there in the lobby of the Peabody. And the significant thing about that store is that they keep a thread alive back to those early days of rock and roll, 50s Memphis, Elvis. They still have 12.5 outfits on the rack that they spec'd or sold for Elvis. They have his favorite cologne, his favorite socks, and several commemorative jackets and things like that they spec'd or sold to Elvis. And I'll usually take people in, and we'll spend a little time in Lansky's store, because even though it's a little confined for a group, if you miss that, you'll miss a lot of real history. And so I show them pictures of Mr. Lansky and Elvis, and Elvis's favorite cologne, Linnell Natural, also known as Love Potion number 9. His father and Elvis both liked that stuff, so they bought it for 50 years from the Lanskys, 50 years. And if Hal were there, he would say, if you want to know what the king of rock and roll smelled like before the concert, not after, then that's it. And we look around at a number of things there. Robert Plant, Led Zeppelin, his picture's up on the wall with Alison Krauss. And that's probably his favorite men's store. Whenever he's in the area, he'll go to Lansky's store and buy clothes. So we had gone to his concert. I'd never seen him before. Tricia and I went to Live in the Gardens and saw his concert one night. So I knew he'd be there the next day, and so I watched the door. And when he came in, I went in and bumped into him. Now, that's highly unethical of me. But I wanted to talk to him, and as we talked, he was trying on a shirt. It was a black country, a Western shirt with a silver brocade on it and all that. And he nodded at it, and I said, yeah, it looks good. And he bought it. So I consider myself a consultant to Robert Plant. And I put it on my resume, but so far, nothing. Now, there's just lots of stories. You got to go down there and check out Lansky's and some of these places. You can tell stories all day long about it, but I'll give you one last one there in that store. Does anybody remember a gentleman named Sam the Sham? Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. He had a song called Willie Bully and Little Red Riding Hood and songs of that nature. Well, he was a pretty wild character when he rode his motorcycle into the lobby there at the Peabody one day, and in his condition, he misplaced his helmet. Never found it again. And Mr. Lansky was moving into that space in 1981, and he found that helmet in a box back in the back. He called him up. Now, Sam, by this time, he's a minister of music in a large metropolitan church. His name is Sam Samudio. And so he called him up. He said, Sam, we found your helmet here at the Peabody. You want to come get it? And he said, well, I tell you what, I don't ride motorcycles into hotel lobbies much anymore, so you keep it. And it's on the wall, and Lansky's in there. It looks like the police helmet from the Schwarzenegger movie, the Terminator. It looks like that kind of helmet. So there's lots and lots and lots of stories about Lansky's. But let's go outside and go back up to the elevator and up to the Skyway Ballroom. And I'll stop at the mezzanine because there's lots of stories there too. But I don't want to bore you to death here. Let's go to the rooftop. And as we get off the elevator, I tell people on my tour, that back in the 40s, 50s, let's say 30s, 40s, and 50s, big band music was the big thing of the day. If you were Guy Lombardo or Les Brown or someone like that, you'd go to places like CBS Radio, who had regional broadcast towers to cover the country. CBS had 3 of them, and that's one of them there in the Skyway Ballroom. So let's say you're Les Brown and you come there and you perform to a live radio audience. for maybe a week-long gig, the announcer would say something like, "Ladies and gentlemen, live from high atop the historic Peabody Hotel in downtown Memphis, Tennessee, in the beautiful Skyway Ballroom, the music of Les Brown and his band of renown." And when you walk through that door, the little imagination, you can still feel it. You walk in, and there's a big round coffered ceiling over a round dance floor. Now the room today looks like a big flexible room, multi-purpose room. It's very pleasant. It's great for seminars because you don't get this closed-in claustrophobic feeling up there. Lots of light. But you look at the original intent of that room. That big round coffered ceiling over the round dance floor was built to contain the audio integrity and keep the echo from bouncing off the walls back in those days. And so most of the big name bands had been there. Even after the big band era was over, artists would come and record on that floor in the Skyway Ballroom because they knew the reputation for acoustical value there. Frequently, it wasn't the feature performer. Frequently, it was the background singers who would do harmonies and stuff in the background, and they'd do that background sound, combine it at the studio with the feature performer. One of Elvis's albums was done up there, and I suspect that his voice wasn't in it there. They probably combined it over at American Sound Studios, I would guess. So, speaking of Elvis and his sound people, Neil Diamond came to Memphis in the late 60s. He hadn't had a hit in a while. He wanted to get the Memphis sound mixed into his music and change his image a little bit. So on the plane from New York to Memphis, he wrote Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show. When he got to the Peabody, he checked in early. He found out that Elvis, in fact, had not left the building. His sound people were still over at American Sound Studios where his session was going to be. So he had to delay an extra day there in the hotel. He played the piano in the lobby. People sat with him and sang, and he went upstairs to his room to kill some more time. And he remembered his trip from the airport to the hotel or wherever he'd been. And he sat down and wrote out the lyrics to a little song called Memphis Streets. And it's still on one of his albums. But then he walked around, he picked up a magazine, he started flipping through, and he found a picture of little Caroline Kennedy and her pony, and he said, "That's a sweet picture." He wrote down the title, Sweet Caroline, and he wrote the song in the room of the Peabody. It wasn't about Caroline Kennedy, that just inspired the lyrics when he spoke those words. He was trying to come up with something for his first wife, Marcia, but try as he may, he couldn't get Marcia to work in those lyrics. And so he retained Sweet Caroline, and he recorded at American Studios along with Brother Love and Holly Holy and those comeback songs. And I love to tell people from the Boston area that story because they think they own that song. So I always thank them for singing that Memphis song in the Red Sox games, and it doesn't always go over that well. So there's a couple of major genres of music that Memphis has heavily impacted, even the Metropolitan Opera in New York. For quite a while, the Memphis region had a lot of operatic talent in it. And because of that, there were 3 or 4 at least well-known operatic voice coaches, people here in Memphis. And what that meant was that unlike most other American cities, a lot of younger people in Memphis weren't so disposed to think of opera as being hokey and all that sort of thing because you knew people that made it, and people went to the Met. I knew a couple of those folks, and so I had a voice teacher here in Memphis, and he taught me, among other things, a couple of Italian arias and different things. And one of them was in Questa Tumba Oscura, or in his sepulchre darkness, or in the dark tomb. And it went, in questa tumba oscura, do mi lasciami riposare, quando vinvevo ingrata, dove via me pensar. Anyway, like that. That was terrible. So anyway, I'll try to do that so people can see the sound quality of that coffered ceiling there, and the naked sound and how well it's contained in that room. So I don't know what it is about Memphis. It's near the population center of the country, near the geographic center. Maybe that's why it was a talent magnet. It's on this flyway, you could call it, the Mississippi River, all that talent coming from the deeper south, funneling through Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, en route to the rest of the world. But in Memphis, that funnel became an incubator for people like Elvis, who combined his favorite genres of music, came up with a hybrid product. Nothing could have affected the world much more than rock and roll. And so I'm take my people out on the rooftop to see exactly where it began. And as we go out, we talk about the rooftop and all of the things that are held up there, all of the dances, the weddings, the corporate events and things like that. We still have our sunset rooftop parties on Thursday evening from April through the beginning of September. And you have a lot of local people and people, guests of the hotel, that go up there. It draws up to 2,500 people every Thursday from April through September. And the band sets up in front of the big building on the rooftop. Well, that building makes a great backdrop for bands. But inside that building is actually 60,000 gallons of water. It's two 30,000-gallon tanks, a couple of mechanical rooms. And it's not for the retention of water, it's for the water pressure. So they draw the water up from the city system, and then they force it back down to the upper floors of the hotel to create pressure in the faucets and so forth. So you've got that. I'll take them out there, and I'll show them the river. And our river, as Dick can attest, our river has been low for a good year. They just didn't have the ice melt up in Minnesota and central Canada last year, and I'm not sure they have it this year either. But the river is up a little bit. So our river stayed low. It didn't rise due to the spring floods in the spring last year. And so it stayed low, and then it just got lower, and pretty soon we couldn't, a lot of the passenger riverboats couldn't land. So hopefully that's not going to happen. It probably was responsible for driving the American Queen out of business, I would guess. At least that was a big portion of it. So I show people that river, and I ask if there's any Johnny Cash fans, because little Johnny was traumatized by one of those spring floods that normally you have in the springtime of the Mississippi River. His father had taken advantage of one of those programs by FDR to get us out of the Great Depression called 40 Acres and a Mule. You'd sign on to those 40 acres, and the government would give you a mule, and you had a rudimentary house that you could build onto. So that's what little Johnny was doing there. He grew up in his early childhood years there. So one day he saw the water rising in his backyard, and it was flowing over toward the backyard of the house that they lived in, and he was really upset because these adults didn't seem to care one way or the other about that water rising, and he's scared. And he goes to his father, and he's out there on the back porch, and he's leaning back, and he's watching the water come in. He's looking at a series of 4 one-foot steps on an outbuilding in the back. He's going to watch the water to see how deep he estimates it is. And that scared little Johnny to death. So he went over to him and he said, "How high is the water, Papa?" He said, 2 feet high and rising. Well, that scared him even more because he knew his father knew he could see it was rising. He wasn't going to do anything still. And so he paced around. He went to his mother. He said, "How high is the water, Mama?" She said, 3 feet high and rising. Well, obviously they got out. But you can imagine the nightmares, the trauma that little boy suffered over the years, thinking that those adults were going to let him drown, until he grew up and he wrote down the lyrics to "How High is the Water" by Johnny Cash. If you get a chance, pull it up online. You can still hear the anxiety in that grown man's voice as he sings about what happened in his childhood. The refrain goes, "How high is the water, Papa? 2 feet high and rising." And he sings about everything he sees at that level. Chickens are roosting in the willow tree, yada, yada, yada. So if you get a chance, pull it up. And remembering that story, and it's kind of interesting. Then we walk over to at least one of the scenes from The Firm, and Tom Cruise and his wife, Jean Triplehorn, are standing over there next to the porch coming off that building on the roof. And I tell them, the camera showed them as they argued, and the Peabody sign up in the distance, and this triple-headed light fixture over to the left, and Gene Hackman stood right over there. At one point during the argument, Tom threatened to jump over the rail if she wouldn't let him stay, but it was probably that rail in front of the building where there's no fault. So then we go to the Duck Palace, and it is a palace for ducks. They've got their own artificially sodded lawn. their own Peabody Hotel, their own granite fountain with a duck spraying water in the middle. They have their own valet service. Me, I've got to give them a shower every morning, no matter what the temperature. And about 6 weeks ago, you might remember, there was a -6 degree wind chill factor. And I looked down and my black pants are turning white to ice, and the ducks are like, spray me again. It doesn't get too cold or too wet for ducks. And I don't mind doing things like that for them. It's just those Barry White songs they keep requesting. I run out of repertoire. Anyway, so then we take a look to the southern approach to the hotel, out across the horizon, where I believe the majority of American pop music was born, out over the horizon and down into the Delta in Mississippi. In 1903, in a little town called Tutwiler, Mississippi, W.C. Handy, a music professor from Florence, Alabama, was visiting. And he found himself in a waiting room in a train station in Tutwiler. And his attention was drawn to this old fellow who was apparently a sharecropper. He had tattered clothes, and his old leather shoes had holes in them. His toes were sticking out of the toe. And he was singing this strange song. He was singing, "I'm going down to where the southern meets the dog." And he's thinking, what in the world is he talking about? Turns out they're on the Southern Railway line, and it intersects at a town further south with the Yazoo and Mississippi Railroad. And that particular line had yellow and black painted engines, and they called them yellow dogs. So he's going down to where the southern meets the dog. Now he's got it all figured out. So, and he starts to relax, but then the guy pulls out this nasty looking knife. And he thought, what's he going to do now? And he starts to stroke the strings on that old guitar. And Handy said it was the weirdest sound he ever heard in his life. So that whole scene stuck in his brain for a couple of years until he moved to Memphis in 1905, and he bought a small house in downtown Memphis. And he set up a desk on the second floor of the Solvent Savings Bank, the first African-American-owned bank in this country. And he had a desk up there on that second floor. And in that little room, he wrote the Yellow Dog Blues, based on that first encounter he had that afternoon. The Memphis Blues, the Beale Street Blues, and the St. Louis Blues, all right there in that little building, the Solvent Savings Bank. That's significant by itself. But out there in the distance, you see a slanted roof metal building with the curved road coming around. That's the Blues Highway, Highway 61. Up that road came Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Robert Johnson, Memphis Minnie and Jelly Roll Morton and Albert King. And dozens of Delta Blues performers came up that road from the Mississippi Delta, because there's nothing down there. There wasn't anything down there. They didn't have enough population, didn't have enough venues. Those people couldn't make their reputation down in that area. So if they were good, they had to come up that Blues Highway to Beale Street. And they played in all the clubs and venues up and down Beale, and they spilled over to the street corners. There was so much music and rhythm going on during that time. It was said it turned into a solid current that would physically carry you down the street. And that's what Mark Cohn was talking about in the song Walking in Memphis. He said, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off of Beale, walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? And Elvis felt it too. Down there you see a little low-rise building with the blue stripe between the hotel and the FedEx Forum. It's approximately the intersection of where the Blues Highway and Beale Street used to be. Elvis heard a blues singer down there named Arthur Crudup singing That's All Right, Mama. The tune stuck in his head. A couple of days later, he and the studio musicians were recording down at Sun Studios. They took a break from the recording. They started jamming That's All Right, Mama. Sam Phillips stuck his head out of the control booth. He said, what in the heck was that? He said, it's something I heard on Beale Street. He said, speed up the tempo and do it again. He did, and Sam recorded it on acetate and took it down to the old Hotel Chiska, where Dewey Phillips on the mezzanine level had his Red Hot and Blue radio program, and it broadcast regionally. He listened to that demo. He said, this is hot, I'm going to play it. He played it 14 times in a row, and in between each time he'd say something like, that's Elvis, he's hot. And he was widely credited with imprinting Elvis's image on the minds of the teenagers of that day. So literally you have the first published blues music written right down in that Solvent Savings Bank, altered in sound over the years by all those Delta blues people coming up Highway 61 with their electric guitars, their steel slides, their glass bottleneck slides, to a Caucasian kid named Elvis who sang his interpretation of what he heard, and it turned into the first rock and roll ever broadcast for the first time ever from the Chiska Hotel. The question of the day is, what in the world is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame doing in Cleveland, Ohio? So after basically from those beginnings over the next year or so, 12 sound studios sprang in that Memphis area. People came from all over the world to record in the Memphis studio. Dusty Springfield came from England, recorded Son of a Preacher Man, Windmills of Your Mind, Just a Little Lovin', B.J. Thomas, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Now somebody corrected me and they said, well, that particular one I think was recorded in L.A., I don't know. But Hooked on a Feeling and ZZ Top, most all their music. All the soul singers of the 60s, Sam and Dave and Otis Redding and B.B. King and Al Green and Booker T and the MGs and on and on and on. More important than all those famous artists is probably the studio musicians that made them all sound good. And that's because there was a perfect collaboration of black and white sensibilities in the music industry in Memphis. When they got together, they extracted something from each other's culture and they came up with a combined sound. It shook the world, didn't it? This is the man that was there in a lot of all that stuff right here. A good example of that was over on Macklemore, a couple of miles from the hotel. Stax Studios. Stax is a combination, a joint effort of a brother and a sister. Her name was Estelle Axton. His name was Jim Stewart, S-T-A-X, Stax. Well, they were bankers, but they always wanted to produce and record country music. But they found a bargain on an abandoned movie theater on Macklemore in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. And they were so busy recording the talent in that neighborhood, they never got around to country music, and there's 600 gold records on the wall. So David Porter, who I showed you a minute ago, and his friend Isaac Hayes grew up around Stax, right around that area down there. Along with a third guy named Maurice White, who's founder of Earth, Wind, and Fire. The three of them grew up together near Stax Studios. And the owners there would let David and Isaac use that back room in that old movie theater. There's an old piano back there, used recording equipment. They would let them try their hand at writing, recording music. They put an album's worth of songs together, but they couldn't afford to produce it. So the veteran producer from up front came back one day and he said, look, fellas, I've heard your sound back here. You're good. Be here on time Friday afternoon. We want a few hours to begin to start to produce that album for you and get your music out. Well, they're ecstatic. This is great. We're going to get our music out. The time comes and Isaac's sitting at the piano and the producer's there waiting. David's late. He comes rolling in 30, 40 minutes late. Isaac said, man, don't even speak to me. You've ruined our chances of getting that album produced today. He said, no, I'll explain it later if something happened. I've been running to get here. Man, I got to use the bathroom. Hold on, I'm coming. He said, what did you say? He said, hold on, I'm coming. Isaac wrote it down, hold on, I'm coming. David got back from the bathroom. They wrote the lyrics to Hold On, I'm Coming. That was the hit of the album produced that afternoon. You can't make that stuff up. Now, along about that same time, there was a musician. He'd never been very successful, but he would hang around Stax. He just wanted to be there when the music was being played. And he would sweep the floors. They'd send him to the airport to pick up recording talent when they came in. But he loved being around that music. And every once in a while, if you didn't watch him, he'd stick his head in the back of the recording booth and add his sound to the harmonies back there. And you'd play a demo, and there he'd be on the back. Where did that sound come from? And it'd be this guy. His name was Otis Redding, and he did a couple of singles there. They let him record a couple of singles, and they were hits. And I guess you could say it was an overnight sensation. But he was flying to San Francisco one day back in the '60s. And he had a gig in a downtown nightclub, and the owners met him at the airport. And they said, look, we can put you up in a nice downtown hotel. And we own a houseboat over in Sausalito. You can ferry over if you'd like and stay there. He said, well, I've never done that before. That's what I want to do. So he ferried over, and he spent all of his mornings watching the tide roll in and watched it roll away again, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. He couldn't wait to get back to Memphis to record those lyrics. When he got back at the end of the week, he ran to see his friend David Porter. And he said, David, look what I wrote in San Francisco this week. David looked at it. He said, this is very good, but if I were you, I'd take that first verse and bury it down in the body somewhere. It's a little weak. Take that last verse and start off with that. It's got more impact. He said, all right, that's a good idea, and he went to record. But he only had a day and a half or so turnaround time before he had to fly out again. He couldn't get all the studio musicians in time. So he called his friend Steve Cropper, who went to the first high school I went to, Messick. He was there years before me. And Steve was lead guitar for Booker T and the MGs. And he's that guy in the old song Soul Man, where they pause in the middle and say, play it, Steve. Steve Cropper, he helped him record a cappella in that empty studio, except for Steve's guitar. When he got to that last verse, Otis didn't want to sing it anymore because David said it was weak, and so instead he whistled through the end of the song. Within the next couple of days, he flew to Nashville. He had a gig at Vanderbilt University, on at the University of Wisconsin. The plane crashed on landing. That was it. They called Steve Cropper back in. They said, Otis is gone. You got to come in and finish up that unfinished song. He said, I'm not touching those lyrics. That whistling belongs there. And he went locally to a sound studio named Pepper and Tanner. Pepper and Tanner owned airspace and radio stations throughout the country that produced jingles, commercials, plug it into the space, sell the package. He knew they had background sounds, environmental sounds, music background. He bought a tape of seagulls calling and the tide rolling in and out, put it in the background of Dock of the Bay. He added those rolling guitar notes when Otis sang, look like nothing gonna change. He added those rolling guitar notes. He called the Memphis Horns in. They added the brass. They released the song, and Otis never heard it. He was gone. So Steve Cropper came and took my tour at the Peabody several years ago, and I'm sweating bullets because that guy was there at all this stuff, and I'm telling him about it. And so we're up on the rooftop, and I said, Steve, I'm a little nervous. He said, why is that? And I said, well, you were there at most of this stuff, and you're really not saying anything. He said, that's all right. You're doing a pretty good job. Go ahead. Keep telling me about myself. I'm thinking, all right, let's see if he's really listening. And I pulled one out of the air. I said, I understand that Wilson Pickett wrote in the midnight hour sitting in the Lorraine Motel one day back in the 60s. He said, no, partner, you got that one all wrong. I said, good. I know you're listening now. He said, I wrote in the midnight hour. Now I knew that. I was just going to rattle his cage a little bit. He said, in the old Holiday Inn Midtown that used to be here, with Wilson Pickett in the room, he said, what you're probably thinking about is a guy named Eddie Floyd. And Eddie and I were sitting in the Lorraine Motel one day back in the 60s. A big black storm front rolled in from Arkansas and lightning shot down. He said, I pulled out my guitar and I started singing, it's like thunder, lightning, the way you love is frightening. Eddie Floyd grinned from ear to ear and he leaned back on the nightstand. He said, yeah, I think I'm going to knock on wood. I'm thinking, holy cow, there's another one straight from the horse's mouth. And that's why I enjoy doing this so much, because people come from all over the world, and they're looking for a big payoff here in Memphis. They're looking for some big news about rock and roll history and so forth. But if you come, you only spend a couple of days, you think, well, what am I going to do? I got to go to Graceland. I guess I got to walk down Beale Street. I suppose I got to go to Sun Studios or Stax. But I thought there was more here than that. And there is. But if you're not going to give it 2 days, you're not going to see it all. And if you don't get a good tour guide, then you're not going to hear the right stuff. So I love to be able to fill in some of the blanks. But this guy does a lot more of it than I do. And so he's the man. But let's see, where were we? Where was I? I forgot where I ended up there. So anyway, I was going to tell you about my last story, which is Union Avenue. If you remember that song, the Memphis song about Mark Cohn, written by Mark Cohn and sung by Mark Cohn. He starts off, he knew he hadn't had a hit in a while. He wanted to get the Memphis sound mixed into his music and change his image a little bit. And so he came to Memphis at the direction of James Taylor, the singer, who told him he needed to go to an iconic music destination he's never been to before, and just go there and spend some time and write about everything that you run into, everything that occurs to you from the time you get there to the time you leave. And he chose Memphis, and he flew to Memphis. And if you remember that song, it starts off, touchdown in the land of the Delta Blues in the middle of the pouring rain. He wrote about everything that occurred to him from the time his plane touched down. But the verse that was interesting to me when I first heard it was about a lady named Muriel. He said, Muriel plays piano down at the Hollywood, and they took me down to see her, and they asked me if I would do a little number, and I sang with all my might, and she said, tell me, are you a Christian child? I said, ma'am, I am tonight. Well, I'd just been to the Hollywood less than a year before I heard that song for the first time. Muriel closed the place down for my old division of Holiday Inns Incorporated, playing that piano at the Hollywood one night, and 2 or 3 of us sat with her on the bench from time to time, invariably before you could get up. She'd grab you by the arm and she'd say, tell me, child, are you a Christian? I thought, holy cow, he's been here. So anyway, this is Union Avenue. The next street over paralleling Union is Monroe. In between Union and Monroe down at the waterfront, there's some excursion boats, the Memphis Queen and the Island Queen. They go out for an hour and a half many days, but back in the 60s and 70s, there was something called the Memphis Showboat, and it wasn't self-propelled. Just a big barge made up to look like a fancy showboat facility. You could have catered dinners and dances and things like that, but if it needed to be repositioned on the water, they had to call for a tug or a tow, something to take them out. And the boat they used primarily for that purpose in the 60s was named the Mary Elizabeth. Mary Elizabeth was the former owner's daughter's name. The Mary Elizabeth pulled up late in the afternoon one day in the 60s, came alongside that showboat and hitched along the side, and that's an important word. It hitched because it didn't have a front bumper or a back tow rod. At that time, it couldn't push or pull. It had to hitch along the side and started moving out toward a sandbar for the evening. A deckhand from the Mary Elizabeth looked down at that hitch as they pulled away to make sure it was tight. And when he did, he caught a vision of what a boat like that must have looked like over 120 years ago, steaming up the river under its own power, and he looked back where the paddle wheel would be. He looked down at the Mary Elizabeth that was supplying the power that day, and he pulled out an empty matchbook cover and he started to write. Big wheel, keep on turning. Proud Mary, keep on burning. Rolling on the river, and he thought that's pretty cool what I just wrote. That night he went back to his room. He started writing the lyrics about his life on the river. I cleaned a lot of plates in Memphis, probably deck plates. I pumped a lot of pain down in New Orleans, but I never saw the good side of the city till I hitched a ride on the riverboat Queen. Happened at the foot of Union Avenue. Now, Creedence Clearwater Revival or somebody came along, they acquired those lyrics. Since John Fogerty didn't know this guy. Now, I'm not saying John Fogerty didn't write this. I'm just telling you that this is my understanding, to the best of my knowledge of exactly what happened. But since he didn't know the guy, he didn't know who to talk to about this business of pumping pain in New Orleans. He spelled it P-A-N-E. That made no sense to John Fogerty. He was a California boy. He'd never seen the Mississippi River in his entire life. So he respelled that word. If you look it up online, it'll say lyrics by John Fogerty. He owns them. He arranged them. He probably added a word. But he respelled that word P-A-I-N just to make it more interesting to him. But the guy pumped industrial gas, propane. He pumped a lot of pain down in New Orleans, and that's what he was trying to tell you. And for 30 years or so downtown was the Butcher Shop, a restaurant. And on the back wall of the front dining room of that restaurant was an oil painting showing 2 river tugs at harbor with a deep reflection down in the water. One of them said Mary Elizabeth across the bow, and tens of thousands of people have eaten dinner there over the years and looked at that picture, have no idea what they're looking at, but you do. That's pretty much it. Now, if you want to know how I firmly believe that is exactly the way that happened, because that's my story. I have a friend, Jimmy Ogle, we talked about. Jimmy, even though he says he's not, he says he's a storyteller. I say he's a pure historian. Because a pure historian is kind of like a pure accountant. You don't want to hire an accountant that likes to see gray areas, you know. So same thing is true of a pure historian. They're going to give you exact dates and eras and times and things like that. And so Jimmy and I were down to the river, and he tells me the details behind that story there. And I said, do you mean to tell me that's where that song came from? He said, I didn't say that. I said, yes, you did. But I'm still, it's kind of disingenuous. And I'm still concerned because to me it's obviously how it happened. But he won't agree to it. So I live out on the lake in Lakeland. I was, my next door neighbor was an old fellow that wouldn't know a story like that if it bit him on the nose. I was talking to him at the mailbox one night, and I told him that story. He said, oh, I know about that. I said, you know about it? I'm thinking I'm the guy that's just kind of uncovered it again. He said, yeah. He said that the guy that owned those 2 boats you were telling me about in that restaurant downtown lived next door to me before I moved here next to you. I said, we're not talking about the same. Yes, we are. Murphy's Marine Services. They owned they were headquartered in the Wolf River Harbor where it goes into the river. Murphy's Marine Services, they owned those 2 boats for 7 years. One of them was the Mary Elizabeth, the Proud Mary. I said, well, how did you find out about this? He said, well, we were at a block party one night years ago, just on the same lake I live on now. He said the band struck up Proud Mary, and Captain Murphy leaned over to me and he said, you know, I had to sign off on the lyrics to that song. He said, you did? He said, yeah, remember I told you I owned those 2 boats for sometimes 7 years. He said, yeah. He said, we had a gentleman on one of those boats who was a deckhand. And he's one of these fellows that sort of mindlessly mimics things that you say, and then maybe he'll rhyme it with something. You had to tell him, shut up, twice a day, you know. And he said he showed up at my house one night, and I said, what are you doing here? He said, well, I've got a chance to sell those lyrics about your boat that I wrote. And he said, but the lawyer tells me I've got to get your sign off because it's your boat. If you can do that for me, then I think I can pay my debts off. Captain Murphy says, all right, I'm going to help you out here. Just don't get me involved in this stuff. He didn't get involved, and the rest is history. That's it, folks. I'm glad I didn't ask you if there were any questions, anything that I have misrepresented or fumbled through here that you want to know about. Okay, it was a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you very much, Doug. Ken, can I have you come up? We're going to have Ken Stewart's going to pray for Doug and pray for us, and then we'll have our lunch in the back.
It is such a joy having y'all here, especially Doug. How powerful stories are. We forget sometimes how powerful stories are, and in the midst of weaving all those, I'm so thankful that he has been available for God to be on. And thank you for coming and sharing the stories. I hear words and names and places that have been part of my life, and I know a part of your life for years and years and years. Even you brought up the name of Messick. My dad used to teach there. But it's a beautiful way for us to not only be able to tell our story, our life. Our Savior did the same thing. He told stories. It engages us to be able to connect with us. And so let's bow our heads as we go to God. God, thank you so much for your presence here. We thank you for Doug and the gift of story that you have given him. How beautiful it is, and it reminds us of how lovely life can be if we're willing to be available. Father, help us in our ability to tell story, that we share the gospel through our lives, that we hear and respond to you wherever you call and how you call us to live our life faithfully in the communities that you have. May we be positive and encouraging as Doug has been shared with us today. May we share your word and your life over table today as we share a meal together, but most importantly, as we share your son in all that we do. For us in Christ's name we pray, and amen.